Welcome to a dialogue on accountability in the digital age. A dialogue with representatives of a global, multi-stakeholder community.
And I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted to have a dialogue with Lisa T. Lisa, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lisa, allow me to introduce you to our audience. You are the CEO of AMP Solutions, but you are also an award-winning author, TED speaker, board member, AI and safety expert, and a former executive with Intel and General Motors. And the topic which actually triggered me to reach out to you is your TED Talk, Bringing Light to Dark Places Online, Disrupting Human Trafficking Using AI. That is a starting point. But I also have to tell the audience, share with the audience, for your work, you have received numerous awards, including the top 10 AI thought leaders according to Thinkers 360 and the top 100 women in ethics, which brings you numerous board advisory roles. So again, Lisa, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. And there's not a topic I think I'd rather talk about than how do we improve outcomes for marginalized groups. So it's really an honor to be here.
Okay. Give me a definition. What are marginalized groups? Just to make certain that we talk about the same thing.
Sure. In my definition, at least my area of focus, I've dedicated the latter part of my career to really focusing in on the ways that we can bring innovation and influential leaders together to address societal justice issues at scale, primarily for women and children globally. Being a woman who has worked in the technology industry for almost 30 years now, I had always committed to myself after traveling to 36 countries before the age of 30, when I got to a place in my career where I could not only have a seat at the table where decisions were being made, but actually have the ability to change the conversation, to make sure that we were looking at the impacts of the decisions we were making and the development of products and services that are distributed globally, to make sure that we're thinking about people that don't just look like us and don't just have our lived experience, but the people that may have been targets of problems in society, such as things as modern day slavery, like human trafficking.
Okay. Actually, when you add up women, minorities, children, that's not a minority anymore in itself. That's a humongous majority, I guess. But still, I get your point.
Yes, in numbers, no in power and decision-making authority. And so I would love to see us not only democratize technology, but democratize dignity and respect as we do it.
Got you. Now, what triggered you to do a TED Talk on this topic, on human trafficking?
So the work began back in 2015, my time at Intel Corporation, when I was leading their AI for Good group. I founded that group around the topic of how do we take some of the technology innovations that were happening in the ecosystem, things like social and mobile and cloud had created opportunities for people to connect in ways that were just transformational. And unfortunately, without guardrails in place, sometimes you have some unintended consequences of those choices. And what became clear to me was that we were making huge headway in personalized medicine and these innovations in healthcare that could really apply artificial intelligence to improve outcomes for humanity. And I wanted to see if there were some ways that we could take the problem of modern day slavery and use these same technology stacks to wade through oceans of data in order to find those pearls of wisdom of how do we disrupt this challenging crime that really is something we've dealt with for the history of humankind. We've had slavery. And so it was really important to me to think about how do we look at this in a modern frame. And from my years of working in technology, I've had a lot of global experience staying all over the world. And at that time, I was in my 20s and I looked more like a flight attendant than I did an executive. And so people behaved really comfortably in front of me. And there's just some things you can't unsee.
Yeah.
I remember being in Malaysia to help set up a call center there on behalf of the company and staying in a business hotel in Kuala Lumpur. And when I arrived there, it was pretty late, but with my jet lag, it didn't feel very late to me. And so I decided to go out into the city and have a cocktail and just try to wind down. And while I was doing that, I looked around and I saw an adult woman walking around with children about 7 or 8 years old. And the children were dressed provocatively, and it became clear that they were for sale. And I was shocked, but it didn't seem to be shocking to many other people in that establishment on a Tuesday night. And it just became really clear to me that um, when good people see something, if they don't stand up and do something, we're going to see a lot of behavior that doesn't align with our values and the goals for improving things for humanity. And so I knew I didn't have the power or the authority to do something at that time, but I knew that when I got to a place where I did, I wanted to make sure that we were bringing that into the conversation. So my TED Talk was really a capstone of multi-years of work. When we got the approval to go forward with helping to apply this problem to the challenge of child sexual abuse material online, and working with some of the lead agencies that are helping to disrupt this international crime without borders, we were able to bring in that lens with places like Thorn and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is where most of these crimes are reported to, at least in the United States. So being able to bring the technology leaders like Google and Microsoft and Intel to the table with some of the best thought leaders in terms of the bridge to law enforcement, we were able to accelerate the processing of these reports from 30 days to 24 hours from tech companies to law enforcement's hands. And to me, there's nothing more impactful about innovation than being able to get people that are victims of crimes out of harm's way as fast as humanly possible. And once I got that bug for being able to see the real world impact of the work that we did, I just couldn't turn back. And I wanted to spark and inspire more people to follow down that journey of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship in order to make sure that innovation is not gated behind big company doors, and that people that have a vision for a different future can step into their power and lead.
Wow. I have to be mindful. I mean, this is quite an emotional topic you're discussing at the moment. I still want to take a more observative discussion, because what triggered me is you explicitly discussing the use of AI to help you resolve this issue. Mm-hmm. What could AI do for you? Is that the reduction of the reports you talked about, or is it something else also which was able to do?
Yeah. At the time, the challenge that we were given was there's a team of analysts whose full-time job it is to try to determine when a case is reported, where in the world the crime occurred, so they can get it to the right law enforcement agency. Okay. Well, criminals have tools to obscure their location. Clearly, we've all heard of the dark web at this point in time. And so the challenge that we were provided was, how can we be using automation and AI to make sure that all the data that's given to these analysts can be used? So an example of this instance that really kind of resonated with me was, if a criminal is logging into abuse and share abuse material of a child 10,000 times, and there's 10,000 IP addresses affiliated with that account from a tech provider that comes to an analyst, it's really difficult to go through every single IP address and determine which ones are dark web nodes or Tor nodes that will never lead anywhere, and which ones are maybe the one time the person forgot to log into something and they're actually giving away their location. And so we were able to partner and develop software to be able to predictively identify of those 10,000 pings, which is likely the most like the location that crime activated, because we were able to remove the ones that would never lead anywhere and find those needles in the haystack. So by being able to give those predictive locations to the analysts, it freed up their time from doing all of that work manually to be adding more detail to the reports that were going to law enforcement for recovering those children. So you not only got the savings of the time of that 30 days in the queue, because when we started looking at this challenge in 2013, there were about 500,000 reports to law enforcement that year for crimes that needed to be followed up on. By the time you fast forward to 2020, there were 21 million reports that year. So when you have a team of 25 analysts with the most mission critical work, you can't just keep adding people at scale. You really needed to be able to leverage technology tools to help you. And so in order to make them freed up to do their subject matter expertise, which is really the investigation and being curious and knowing how to prioritize and get the right information to law enforcement at the right time, that made sure that the reports were more actionable once they were received by law enforcement. So once I saw AI as that best assistant you ever had model versus a competitor to the humans, it became very clear that so many of us spend so much of our time doing these really tactical, repetitive, tedious kinds of activities, including places like detectives that are looking for these victims. Some extension of that work we were able to do was to be able to take photos of currently missing children and compare them against escort ads. And by using AI technology, we were able to do some nearest neighbor searches in order to align the pictures at the top of the window with the most likely matches. So what does that allow for a detective that's scrolling through pages about pages? If there's only 20 children that you're comparing, sure, that's not that you probably don't need automation for that. But in the world of escort ads, there's hundreds of thousands posted every single day. And so being able to order those images in the order of most likely match allowed them to identify which people were on there were definitely human trafficking victims, because a person under the age of 18 cannot consent to escorting. And they were able to recover those victims with a higher priority because they were able to match them faster. And in fact, the first time that went into production, they recovered 130 children in the first month.
Okay, good, because I was indeed interested in the numbers. But so you're in the first month, you basically saved 130 children from
law enforcement was able to recover 130 victims of human trafficking and help to get them the services they need to have a different path forward. And, you know, you can't rescue everybody. You can't save everybody. You can't undo trauma. But at least I know as a mom and a woman in tech, like my instincts are always in the area of not on my watch. These criminals aren't going to get away with this and just have no ramifications on my watch if I can prevent it. But realistically, today in the landscape that we have, a lot of people do get away with these crimes because there's more reports than people to follow up on them. And there's not a lot of accountability in the system for chasing down these offenders.
Now, okay, you're talking about a major crime where the use of technology, AI technology, is going to help you. Given the severity of the crime, would you also then be an advocate of unlimited use of the technology because of the crime? Or do you still feel, okay, we also have to protect unlimited use of the technology?
It is an interesting dynamic because I don't think that technology is necessarily good or evil inherently. I think it's neutral. It's what people choose to do with it. So I think an example of a place where potentially a limited use case could be helpful is in the area of generative AI art. We've seen an explosion of generative AI being used to create these child sexual abuse material pictures from pictures of people's actual children. It goes from being really nebulous and like a big thinking thought experiment to, oh my gosh, I posted pictures of my own family on publicly available sites for social networking for the last 20 years. And now somebody's taken my child's image and created this pornography out of it. I think things that I've been thinking about in back rooms and technical spaces with people that frankly could make a lot more money and have an easier job than working in trust and safety in the tech industry are coming to real life. So my answer to you is this: I believe in innovation. I believe that we need to have, I believe in open source. And I also believe in regulation and guardrails. I don't think they have to be the opposite of each other. We had automobiles on the road for many, many,
Yeah.
many years before we mandated seatbelts.
Mhm.
And what happened when we mandated seatbelts? We reduced automotive fatalities by 80%. And, in that same instance, if you're a good driver or a bad driver, you still have to wear it. There's a ticket if you don't. And I'd like to see a blended model where we still encourage and accelerate innovation, but we have rules of the road and we apply reasonable standards to making sure that people are using them responsibly.
Okay. Using it responsibly also means you have to know how it works. Driving on the road means you have to have a driver's license. Are you now implying that in order to use it responsible, you're advocating for like a digital driver's license or a license to use digital technology?
There is a part of me for young people that feels like it would be really smart to put something like that in. But I actually see it slightly differently, which is I still get a ticket if my child isn't buckled in to the
Yeah.
car. It's really more the seatbelt to me than the actual driver's license. So I feel like we have to have an agreed upon standard where we all agree that we do at least this bare minimum. And the reason that that's incredibly important is nobody would have ever funded seatbelts in cars and made it a standard globally had there not been regulation where they would have had to pay fines if they didn't do it. And you don't need to be a expert in the safety of children to know that you have to design, say, a seatbelt a little bit differently for somebody that's a small person versus a large person. I think we can look at it just more practically than politically. And how do we mitigate the biggest harms with the least amount of regulation possible?
Okay, and you could say taking that parallel a little bit further, it was actually Volvo who introduced the three-way seatbelt, and rather
Yes.
than applying for a patent, they said no, this is such important safety measurement. We're going to give it away for free so everybody can use that. Which I mean,
Yes.
kudos for Volvo, but
But would manufacturers have invested in changing their manufacturing lines for cars, even to take advantage of that open source, had it not been regulated? My guess is no.
no, yeah,
People in the C-suite and boards have fiduciary responsibilities to their investors and their shareholders.
yeah.
And if it's not an even playing field for incentivizing the right behaviors and decisions, we're going to see an asymmetry of the prioritization of trust and safety in these models.
Do you see like a Volvo type of organization or company in our digital world?
I see a lot of places that are keenly focused on bringing the industry as well as the public sector together to try to make frameworks for responsible artificial intelligence or to accelerate trust and safety. Some of my favorites are places like All Tech is Human, which open sources a lot of their recommendations and frameworks. I also see a lot of innovation. Most of the cutting edge things that I see that I'm behind come out of the eSafety Commissioner's Office out of Australia with Julie Ingham Grant. I think her perspective, having been an insider in technology as well as a regulator now for many years, brings a really balanced perspective to bear. There also are wonderful organizations that are really doing their absolute best to innovate in this space. Places like the Tech Coalition that aren't available to the broad public, but to private companies where this is what they do. I love to share this with people because sometimes I think we hear all the stories of hopelessness and none of the hope. And that is that the people that choose to work in trust and safety at these tech companies tend to be the most passionate, dedicated, talented technologists you will ever have the chance to meet. And people that are traditionally competitors in the landscape for their products are collaborators behind closed doors in this space. Nobody wants felonious material on their platforms. And so I think there's a lot of work that's happening behind closed doors to make sure that we can make this as safe as possible. And I would love to see again, the place of regulation, because until these companies are incentivized financially to prioritize lists, like what we saw with privacy, with GDPR, with real fines if you don't invest in it, these teams are going to be too small and too underfunded to have the impact that they are capable of doing.
Okay. I like your thinking, by the way, or I find it interesting that you said that when we look at, if we tackle this on a very practical level, then we see a multi-stakeholder discussion taking place, industry and government working together. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, and I think there's a role also for getting beyond just big tech being the private sector voice, because they don't really have an incentive to regulate themselves outside of the fact that small businesses couldn't compete if the regulations come in. I would love to see us use better cross-pollination from other industries. For example, things like in the advertising industry, we have consumer protections in the advertising industry, and we use a lot of automation to enforce that. Is there something that we could be bringing in? I think we need to do a lot more taking what's worked in other areas for the same challenges that we're talking about, which is consumer protections, environmental protections, all of those kinds of things, and apply it into this space. Again, AI is simply a tool. It is not a solution. Just because I know how to use Microsoft Word and write a novel in English doesn't mean I know how to do it in French. AI is, is that Microsoft Word. It's not making all the decisions. It's recognizing the patterns and pulling them up for humans to make decisions based upon in most cases.
But that also then means that in order for people, I would say the general public, to understand that that is what it is, that also then requires a little bit of education, some awareness of what it is and what it isn't, because at the moment it depends upon which part of the world you are, but some parts see this as like the big enemy taking away jobs, because maybe that's true, but I think for a large part that emotion is also coming from the fact that we don't really know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I probably have a unique perspective on this, given that I grew up in Detroit, where we saw the automotive industry go through a lot of automation changes that did reduce employment. And now being in Silicon Valley, we're starting to see another wave of that with AI. But I also see the other side of it, which is when you can bring people along with those changes and upskill them, they actually can have jobs that are more fulfilling, that leverage what makes them uniquely human more than the loss. And so with the exabytes of data that are created every day, I don't think anybody's going to put the genie back in the bottle. I think it's not an AI-driven future anymore. It's an AI-driven present that we're starting to live in. So it's estimated by 2025 that 50% of the workforce will require some level of data literacy or upskilling in order to be effective. And so I would love to see us more focus on how do we democratize the information of how to leverage these tools as one of the best assistants you've ever had, versus thinking about it as something that's going to replace you in your job. Because I think that it's going to be much more likely in our lifetimes that we're competing with people in the workforce still. Yeah. But the difference is the game changer is going to be your best subject matter expert in supply chain logistics, for example, will not be as competitive as your worst supply chain management expert with an AI assistant that can help them to accomplish the same task. And so it's not about being perfect with AI or understanding all the underlying models or every little nuance of it. It's about having a trusted partner ecosystem where you're making sure that the vendors that you're buying from that are using these technologies are following standards that you believe in. They're following cybersecurity and privacy standards that make them solid solutions for corporate places and multinational companies, and that you're bringing your humans who are the business experts along to be able to leverage them. It has to be an investment in bringing the people with it, or else it's going to be yet another technology failed experiment. most things don't fail because of the tech. They fail because the humans don't get brought along with it.
As the saying goes, a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And AI is never going to be perfect. I think the quote that I like the best is, don't think of autonomous vehicles as, better cars. Think of them as better horses. Horses still have problems when they're being used for transportation, but an automated vehicle is probably a little more reliable than a horse for getting hurt from going from one place to the next. There will be accidents on the road the same way there still is with seatbelts. We still have fatalities. But I think that we can reduce the harm significantly by focusing in on guardrails.
Yeah. I very much like that analogy. I've never heard that before, that a self-driving car is just a better horse.
Yeah. I can't take credit for it. It was not my own thought. I wish I could attribute it to the right keynote speaker. I believe I was at a Pure Storage conference in San Francisco, California, in approximately 2017 when I heard that. And, as somebody who worked deeply in data storage and been thinking about a lot of these things for many years now, that really resonated with me. I also love the Henry Ford quote that, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted faster horses, not the automobile. I think we're due for a pivot and an innovation that we can't fully anticipate today, but I do believe we can work on our preparedness for being able to leverage it when the opportunity shows up. And that's what I hope is to inspire the business leaders and the innovators and the entrepreneurs to be thinking about what is the problem that they would like to solve in the world, that they can leverage this huge opportunity to make headway on. For me, it was human trafficking. For others, I hope it's the environment and senior care and healthcare innovation, peace and conflict negotiation. Everybody, if we all focus on not the technology, but the one thing we're passionate about solving and are willing to dedicate our lifetimes to it, I think we're going to see that technology will help us get much farther, much faster in that.
Okay, so you're very much a proponent of what I'd call the AI for good movement. You see the benefits it's offering.
I do. I've worked in it since 2015, and I think it's just like everything in AI. Humans are creating the models. They're curating all the data that's in the models. It's all a human touch, and so we're perpetuating patterns of what has happened historically into what happens in the future. And I think that when you can bring humans that have a more diverse perspective, that perhaps we could be doing that in a more intentional and societally beneficial way.
Hey, now we've talked a lot about indeed how technology can benefit society. Now, one last question, and that is, again, going back to the accountability question. What's your view, your vision on how we're going to keep that technology accountable we are now using for those societal issues and providing solutions?
So blame my management consulting days, but I think you only achieve what you measure, and you're only going to see the behavior you want when you incentivize it. I would love to see so many more of the C-suites be held accountable with their senior leadership, with their bonuses and their objectives, having measurable goals of accountability for AI governance, for compliance with terms of service, for understanding that the levers of their business, the same way they have to with cybersecurity and with privacy, that they're monitoring for safety as well. And they're putting their investments of people, time, and talent into solving some of the safety issues, the same way we've seen huge strides in cybersecurity. I think it was probably 10 years, we talked about how important cybersecurity was going to be, but it wasn't until people started having breaches and fines that executives started to prioritize it in terms of investments. And I hope that we're at the beginning of the wave of making the investment in that for artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all the other breakthrough capabilities that we're going to see in our lifetime, because at the end of the day, we do have control over this. At least today we do. If we make the right decisions and we lay the right groundwork, I believe that we can all flourish.
Okay. One final extra question. What's the low-hanging fruit?
I think today the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, in trust and safety is specifically in the areas of child sexual abuse material. Today, most of the regulations are focused on removing content that's already been discovered and cataloged.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of tools that are available within the industry to proactively identify felonious content with a very light touch way of being able to identify it. Right now, we use a lot of hashing algorithms to the same way in my mind, it's this. We are willing to sacrifice some of our privacy for to protect our devices from scammers and fraud, right? We all have some kind of software on our devices that is making sure that we don't have issues with criminals getting into our devices. That doesn't require us for a human to look through all of our emails and all of our private information and communications. I think if people really understood how uninvasive most of the technology stacks are this day, using AI to protect our most vulnerable, our children online, they would be much more open to content moderation and regulation. I fear that in most cases, we are prioritizing the privacy of adults and criminals over the privacy of our young people. And I think that's something we're going to look back on in 20, 30, 40 years and be horrified by.
Okay, let's see if we can start to tell the people in charge, tell them, hey, to maybe reset their priorities. And I want to, Lisa, I want to applaud you for trying to disrupt the human trafficking using AI. So I want to thank you for sharing your insights, how you are using AI to tackle that societal issue. And at the same time, sharing your thoughts on how we're going to keep this accountable, that we're going to do, you could say, AI for good. So I'm going to thank you so much for your time with us for the Institute for Accountability in the Digital Age. Thank you.
Such an honor to be here. Thank you so much.